All right, welcome in everyone to our deep dive today, all about family businesses. And I know you're out there, you're the kind of person who loves to get into the nitty-gritty of what makes these companies tick,
I
especially how their unique dynamics impact their performance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we've got some really cool research to get into.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be looking at a 2024 study from the British Journal of Management, and it explores something called socio-emotional wealth.
Right.
Now, I know,
Bitchy. Right.
catchy
Yeah.
title,
Well.
but stick with us, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
It gets really, really interesting.
It really does.
So, I mean, I'll just be honest. Socio-emotional wealth, or SEW for short, it's not the sexiest term, but
No, not
but,
really.
but it captures these non-financial things that family businesses often really prioritize, right?
Yeah.
Control, influence, legacy, and that like deep emotional connection to the company itself.
Definitely. And these are all things that, traditional business logic might not even consider, right?
Exactly.
They might say that soft stuff, who cares? But it turns out it really matters.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like holding on to a family heirloom that's not worth a ton of money, but means the world to you.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we're focusing today on family control,
Okay.
and there are two kind of key aspects of SEW that we're gonna unpack: family control and influence, XEI. So we'll to make it easy,
Right.
and identification of family members with the firm, or FI.
Perfect.
So those are the aspects, by the way, that family business leaders themselves say are most important to them.
Yes, absolutely. These are the things that they care about. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you might think, well, if you've got, family involved, you're going to have better decisions and more commitment, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like everyone's aligned, but the study actually initially hypothesized that high FCI would actually hurt performance.
Oh, okay. So there's the flip side.
Yeah, there's a dark side potentially.
Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
Oh.
Too much family involvement could lead to unqualified people in key positions,
Exactly.
family drama impacting decisions,
Yeah.
or, even playing it too safe and missing out on opportunities to really grow.
Right, right. Maybe not wanting to take the risks that you need to take to really, hit those home runs, but
Did the study actually find that, though?
well, that's the surprising part.
Okay.
The data actually showed no statistically significant link between high FCI and poor performance.
Really? Huh. So it's not like a recipe for disaster. But does that mean family businesses with tight control are outperforming everybody else?
It's not necessarily about being better, right, than non-family businesses. It's just recognizing that that family presence doesn't mean you're automatically going to fail. There are other things going on.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And this is where, FI, this identification piece comes in, and this is where things get, I think, really exciting.
Okay.
Because the study found a strong positive connection between FI, that feeling of family, and company performance.
Oh, wow.
So when family members and even non-family employees feel this deep sense of belonging, like they're part of something, they're more motivated, they're more committed, they're going to go the extra mile.
That makes sense.
And the company benefits.
It's like that team feeling.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
bigger, deeper.
Deeper. Yeah, it's more meaningful. It's not just we're all wearing the same jersey. It's we're in this together kind of thing. We're family.
Okay, so but hold on. You mentioned earlier, there are other factors that can make things more complex.
Right, right.
What were those? What were some of the nuances?
Yeah, so one factor that really stood out was CEO tenure.
Okay.
And this is where it gets a little paradoxical.
Uh-oh.
The study found that longer CEO tenure, particularly in family businesses, can actually weaken the positive effects of FI.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That's counterintuitive. I'm struggling to understand. I mean, how would a CEO who's been there longer, wouldn't they have a stronger grasp on the company's values and the family dynamics?
Well, it's not so much about understanding the values, right, as it is about being open to new ideas and new ways of doing things.
Okay.
Because what we see is that sometimes those long-tenured CEOs, even in family businesses, they can fall into a pattern that the study calls cognitive rigidity, which is a fancy way of saying they get stuck in their ways, they become less flexible, less willing to embrace change, and they might even resist input from others, especially if it challenges the established way of doing things.
I see. Is that been there, done that mentality?
Yeah, exactly.
So even in a family business,
Right.
where you think, there'd be more trust, shared values,
Yeah.
that resistance to change could actually like stifle the very things that make FI so beneficial.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a good reminder that, even the most successful leaders need to be aware of this potential pitfall, right?
Yeah.
They need to actively cultivate a culture of openness, encourage diverse perspectives, be willing to adapt, because the world's changing, the business landscape is changing, and you got to be ready to change with it.
This is like honestly making me rethink some of my own assumptions about family businesses.
Yeah, well, that's what good research does, right? It challenges our thinking.
Okay, so we've got FCI, which isn't inherently bad,
Right.
FI, which is generally good,
Hmm.
but can be like undermined by, a CEO who's stuck in their ways.
Right.
But what about the new generation of leaders,
Yes.
right? Like, what about millennials? They're
Millennials.
supposed to be like shaking things up,
There's
right?
the stereotype, right? They're the disruptors.
So does this study, does it tell us anything about how they fit into this whole like SEW equation?
It does. And it's fascinating. So they were looking at millennial CEOs, right? And they actually found that contrary to expectations,
Okay.
millennial CEOs actually boost the positive effects of FI.
What?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's not what I was expecting at all.
Yeah. So even though they might have this reputation for being, a less loyal, more focused on individual goals,
Right.
when it comes to family businesses, they're actually like enhancing that family-centric approach.
That's wild. So maybe, just maybe, we've underestimated the potential of millennial leaders, especially like in this context.
It's possible, and it raises some really interesting questions about why this is the case, Perhaps millennials, despite the stereotypes, they find a unique sense of purpose in leading a family company.
Okay.
Something that like really resonates with their values. And when everybody in the company shares that sense of purpose, that high FI, they're able to achieve even greater things.
So we've got this like interesting dynamic where a long tenured CEO might dampen the benefits of FI, but then a younger, millennial CEO comes in, supercharges it.
Right, right.
That's a big shift. I'm like super curious to learn more about how all these different factors kind of play into SEW and performance.
Well, you're in luck because the study also looked at how these dynamics play out in different cultures and contexts.
Okay, so we're going global now. This is
Right.
getting deeper than I anticipated.
It always does, right? But before we dive into that,
Yeah, for sure.
maybe we should take a little pause
Yeah.
and just recap what we've learned so far.
Yeah, let's do that. So SEW, or those non-financial values, we've established that it's a powerful force in family businesses.
For sure.
Family control, or FCI, isn't inherently bad for performance.
Right.
But it's not a, guaranteed path to success either.
Yep.
On the other hand, FI, that sense of family identification, generally a good thing. Especially apparently with a millennial CEO at the helm.
It seems so, yeah.
But we also learned that even FI can be weakened by things like a CEO who's been in charge for too long.
Right. They get a little too comfortable. And the other thing we're going to talk about in the next part of our deep dive
Oh, right.
is that different cultures and contexts can really influence how these factors play out in some really fascinating ways.
Okay, so we are going global. We're going to see how SEW looks different around the world. We'll be right back after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back and we're ready to go global.
Let's do it.
You mentioned that the study looked at how SEW plays out in different cultures.
Yes.
Which makes total sense, right? Like what works for a family business in one country might not work somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, think about it. The study included over 1,800 family businesses.
Wow.
Across 33 countries. So, there's a lot of cultural diversity to consider. And one of the most interesting findings was how FEI interacts with what they call market dynamism.
Okay, market dynamism.
Yeah.
So basically how competitive and fast-paced a particular market is. So Silicon Valley would be highly dynamic, whereas a small town with a few long-standing businesses would be less so.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And what they found is that the positive effect of FI on performance was actually stronger in countries with high levels of market dynamism.
Oh, that's interesting. So in those cutthroat, constantly changing markets, having everyone aligned and committed to the company's mission is even more crucial for success.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally.
If the ground is constantly shifting under your feet, you need that extra level of trust and unity.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're a family business operating in a really fast-paced market, investing in that strong sense of family identification, that FI could be like a key competitive advantage.
I think so, yeah.
Now, you said the positive effect of FI was stronger in dynamic markets. Does that mean like it's less important in um, more stable environments? Like if a family business has been, the only bakery in town for generations,
Right.
maybe they don't need to worry about FI as much.
That's a great question. The study didn't necessarily find that FI was bad in those environments,
Okay.
just that the effect wasn't as pronounced. It's like, FI is always beneficial, but it becomes even more crucial when you're facing, constant disruption and intense competition.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like an extra boost when you need it most, but still a good thing to have regardless.
Yeah.
What about FCI?
Yeah.
Did they find any like cultural variations in how that impacted performance?
They did. And it's a bit more nuanced this time. They looked at the relationship between FCI and something called corporate governance mechanisms.
Corporate governance. Ooh, that sounds fancy.
Hmm.
So we're talking about like boards of directors, external advisors, those kinds of systems for like accountability and transparency.
Exactly. And
Uh-huh.
what they found was really fascinating. In countries with weaker institutional environments, so places where there's, less transparency, more corruption, less reliable legal systems, high levels of FCI were actually positively associated with the adoption of those corporate governance mechanisms.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That's so unexpected. I would have thought like in those, less than ideal environments, family businesses would want to keep everything close to the vest, avoid outside scrutiny as much as possible.
Right, keep it all in the family.
Yeah. But they're actually like embracing more oversight.
It seems counterintuitive, but it kind of speaks to the adaptability of family businesses, right? Like in those situations where they might not be able to fully rely on external institutions for like fairness and stability, they create their own internal safeguards.
So it's almost like they're compensating for that lack of trust in the broader system by
Yeah.
like building their own internal systems of like checks and balances. That's fascinating. It really challenges the notion that family businesses are inherently resistant to outside input.
It really does. And I think this finding suggests that family businesses aren't just, blindly clinging to tradition. They're making strategic decisions based on the specific challenges and opportunities of their environment. They're more adaptable and sophisticated than we often give them credit for.
Okay, so we're seeing that SEW and how it impacts a family business can really vary depending on the cultural context.
Yeah.
SEI is even more powerful in dynamic markets, and FCI can actually lead to more responsible governance in less transparent environments.
Mm,
That's a lot to absorb.
it
I'm
is.
like starting to see why this study is so important. It's not just confirming our assumptions about family businesses; it's challenging us to like rethink them entirely.
Absolutely. And this brings us to perhaps the most important takeaway from our whole deep dive here.
Mm.
One that moves beyond just like performance and profits and looks at the human side of things.
Okay.
Because up until now, we've been focusing on how SEW impacts a company's financial success.
Right. Right.
But what about the impact on the people involved, the family members themselves? Is prioritizing SEW always a good thing for them?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And honestly, it's not something that I had really considered before. I think we often romanticize the idea of, a family working together, but I can definitely see how this intense focus on legacy and control and emotional ties could create tension and conflict.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there like a dark side to SEW, not just for the business, but for the family's well-being?
It's definitely a question worth exploring, and that's exactly what we'll do in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready to hear it. We'll be back in a moment for the final part of our deep dive into the human side of socio-emotional wealth. Okay, we're back, and we're like getting ready to get personal.
Yeah.
We've been really exploring how socio-emotional wealth, those non-financial values, those can impact a family business's success.
Right.
But you've pointed out there's like a whole other side of this story, the impact on the family itself.
The human side of things. Right, because it's easy to kind of overlook that, and you're just thinking
Huh.
about the numbers and the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure.
But, at the end of the day, family businesses, they're about people. And those relationships can be really, really complex, especially when you add, business dynamics into the mix.
Totally. I mean, we all know family relationships can be challenging, even, at the best of times.
Exactly.
So, like, what are some of the downsides? What are the potential downsides of, like, really prioritizing SCW?
Oh, well.
How can this focus on legacy, control, emotional ties? How can that actually, like, backfire and hurt the family?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest risks is just, conflict
Mm.
and resentment. Especially when you get into really sensitive topics like succession planning.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine, a founder who has poured their heart and soul into a business, right?
Yeah.
It's their legacy, it's their baby, and now they're having to think about handing over control, maybe even to their own child. And that can be really, really difficult emotionally.
Oh, I can only imagine. I mean, there's so much like weight of history,
Yes.
pressure to live up to expectations,
Yeah.
and then, throw in maybe a little sibling rivalry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a lot to handle, even for like, the most functional families.
for sure.
Yeah.
And if those emotional dynamics aren't addressed in a healthy way, they can really, kind of fester
Yeah.
and lead to fractured relationships, bitterness. You even see like legal battles that just tear families apart.
Oh, wow. So like that's a far cry from the kind of idyllic image we have,
Right.
of like a happy family all working
The
together.
Waltons. Yeah, exactly.
So what can family businesses do? Like is there anything they could do to like protect themselves from those pitfalls? Is
Yeah.
there a way to get like the benefits of SEW without, sacrificing the family's well-being?
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic bullet, unfortunately. But there are some strategies that can make a big difference. I think one of the most important and often overlooked is just open and honest communication.
Okay, that sounds simple enough.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's probably a lot harder to actually do, especially when you're talking about like, who's in charge, who gets paid what.
Right, exactly.
Right.
These are tough conversations, but I think it's crucial to create a space where everyone feels safe,
Yeah.
to share their thoughts and their feelings, even if those feelings are negative or, they go against the grain. It's just about making sure that everybody feels heard and respected, even if they don't agree.
So like family therapy.
It might not need to be that dramatic, but I do think it's important to make communication a regular part of the family business culture. It
Oh,
could be formal family meetings, it could be casual get-togethers, it could even just be one-on-one conversations. I think the key is just to make it a habit.
right. Yeah, make it normal.
Yeah, and not something that you only do when there's a crisis.
Okay, so communication is key. What else? What else can family businesses do to kind of navigate this tricky terrain?
I think another important strategy is to set clear boundaries between the family and the business.
Boundaries? Okay. So like no shop talk at the dinner table. Is that what we're talking about?
That's part of it, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. It's really about creating a separation between the roles that people play in the business and their relationships as family members.
Okay.
So it's recognizing that, being the CEO doesn't give you the right to, boss your siblings around at Thanksgiving
Right. Yeah.
and vice versa.
I can see how that would be helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy to imagine how, disagreements about business decisions could like spill over
Totally. Yeah.
into like family dynamics
Absolutely.
and then create resentment.
Yeah.
So like having those boundaries can really help contain the conflict and, protect the family relationships from being totally consumed by the business.
For sure. It's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Between the two worlds and recognizing that both are important.
Okay. So we've got like open communication, we've got clear boundaries. Any other words of wisdom for our family business listeners out there?
Yeah, I think one more, and maybe this is the most important of all. Don't be afraid to seek outside perspectives.
Okay, bring in like a consultant, a therapist, like a wise old mentor figure. What are we talking about here?
It could be any of those things. I think the key is just to recognize that sometimes families get stuck in their own patterns, their own ways of seeing things. And sometimes an outsider can come in and offer a fresh perspective
Right.
and challenge those assumptions and help the family see things in a new light.
It's like that saying you can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need somebody who's standing outside the forest to be like, "Hey, look at all those trees." And in a family business, that outside perspective can be super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they can help facilitate those difficult conversations. They can provide objective advice on, things like succession planning, or they can just be a sounding board,
Yeah.
for ideas and concerns. It's just recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers yourself,
Right.
and that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Okay, so to recap, the keys for navigating the emotional side of SEW. Communicate openly and honestly.
Yes.
Set clear boundaries between the family and the business.
Uh-huh.
And don't be afraid to seek outside perspectives. Solid advice.
Yeah.
Even for those of us who aren't, running a family empire.
I think these principles apply to any relationship, really, any situation where emotions and business decisions kind of intersect.
Well, there you have it. We've gone deep, deep, deep into the world of socio-emotional wealth.
We have.
We've explored the benefits and the potential pitfalls. We've learned that family businesses, they're complex ecosystems where business decisions and family dynamics are just like totally intertwined.
For sure.
And while prioritizing SEW can be a real powerful driver of success,
You can.
you got to be mindful of the human side of things.
Absolutely.
And for anyone out there who's interested in like the dynamics of family businesses,
Yeah.
I think you're going to find these insights like super valuable as you navigate, your own path.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating deep dive. And I think the most important takeaway is that, family businesses, they're more than just businesses.
Yeah.
They're about people and relationships and legacies.
Yeah.
And understanding those complexities, it's not just about achieving financial success.
Right.
It's about, ensuring the well-being of the family is at the heart of it all.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we will leave you to ponder these complexities. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those questions coming.